resident alien, we should probably open title early? Is
Right.
that true?
Yes, yes, definitely.
It's another situation.
And we also have a couple of resources in the community that are CPAs and attorneys that deal with this on a regular basis that we can give their name out as a referral. Is someone that if you are working with someone who's not a U.S. citizen or resident alien, they can get some professional advice. Because we're not qualified to give that advice, but there are others that are, and we can give their names as referrals to go to them for help. You know, how to apply for a waiver and how long does that take. So,
would that be done by a tax attorney or an immigration attorney?
we've seen a tax attorney in the Woodlands and then a CPA as well.
Okay.
The CPA that we refer has actually come into our office and done some realtor training on this subject.
Okay.
Did a presentation that we invited realtors in the area to our office.
Great.
We're seeing it come up quite a bit in the Woodlands because of our diverse population here.
Yes.
And we have a lot of people from all other countries, a lot from Mexico, but from a lot of other countries as well. And they're not buying little bitty homes, they're buying high-dollar properties here. So that it is something that we ask the question. Some people have gotten offended. It's like, no, we ask it on every transaction, and it is actually part of your contract that deals, it's like the very last paragraph of your contract, which we blew up and put on here, that briefly touches on it. So, oh, and the other thing to know is if it is a situation where we do have to withhold that 10% from the seller at closing, and we do have to send that money to IRS, I think they give us 20 days, 20 days from closing to do that. We'll help facilitate all of that. The buyer and the seller both get copies of everything. But it doesn't mean that that seller can't get their money back if they didn't owe that money.
Right.
If they just file a return with the IRS and they get a refund.
The next year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do you charge extra when you have to do this kind of stuff? That's part of it?
It's just part of the deal.
Yeah, just so nice.
It's just something that we know needs to be dealt with, so mainly for buyers.
Yeah.
So they're not caught. I know Lacey had a transaction a year and a half or so ago where they did all the proper paperwork. The seller was not a U.S. citizen, not a resident alien. They collected the money, sent it to the IRS. The buyer actually got a letter from the IRS.
Yep.
Stating that taxes were owed.
Wow.
And they were shocked.
First person they call is title company.
Right.
Doing, I thought we handled this at closing.
Mhm.
So Lacey provided them copies of everything. Said respond to this letter with all of this documentation to show that it was handled at closing.
So there had just been a mistake.
Yeah.
Made by
Exactly.
the IRS.
By the
Yeah.
IRS, yeah. But they don't make mistakes.
Oh,
They
no,
don't.
no.
Yeah. So, anyway, yes, we get to deal with their fun. We do have the buyer sign a waiver at closing on all of our transactions that we're not insuring whether or not the sellers are U.S. citizens. We're not responsible for that, and we really aren't. We're not the withholding agent. The IRS law says the buyer is, but we feel like we need to educate them and help facilitate it.
Yeah.
We're dealing with this stuff every day, they're not. So, okay. More fun.
Foreclosures. The bank forecloses on a property by recording a substitute trustee's deed, and then typically the bank will open title with their preferred title company. I know that we handled, was it a few years ago?
I had it's called REO, which is real estate owned, and I had a bank account where I handled their foreclosure properties, and I'm not sure exactly what part. It was some section of Houston North, all of their foreclosures. It was a really good learning experience, but it was a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
If a bank owns a property, there are a lot of things that we're clearing out before they ever sell it. They would give us a list every month of all their foreclosures for that month, and we would open title on them. And then that's where the work started. Was there are things like if they haven't paid their mortgage, they probably haven't paid their homeowners association either.
Mhm.
So then there's liens for the homeowners association.
Taxes.
They
or.
probably haven't paid their taxes. So all of this comes out and gets cleared up prior to a contract coming in. Once the contract comes in and all of this foreclosure business is taken care of, it typically goes as a typical transaction, only the bank is the seller because they now own the property. It's just interesting, and I don't have that account anymore, mostly because it was a smaller account, and most big banks have bought out those smaller banks, and they have like a national management company that handles all their foreclosures, and they're probably in some other state, like New Jersey. So it was very unusual that it was a local branch that handled those foreclosures and got to choose their title company. So if you have a client, a buyer who's looking at foreclosure properties, probably you will not get to choose the title company. The bank will already have one, and they will be very remote. And I don't know if you've ever done a relocation transaction, but it'll be a lot like that. We've got a contract this thick of all their disclosures. So that's only a little bit of an exaggeration. So, okay.
And then short sales. What is a short sale? Do you know what a short sale is?
I haven't done one yet.
Short sale is when somebody goes to sell their property, but they may not have the amount of money, or they may not have enough that the required payoff is, and they may not have money to bring to closing to offset that. So basically it's negotiation with their payoff lender on a price that they're willing to accept without the seller having to bring in any money and pay out anything.
Right.
Do they, if that transaction is agreed upon after the property is sold, do those people still owe the difference? Or is it just agreed upon that the bank will take less for this
Yeah,
amount?
it's just agreed upon that the bank will take less. Some banks are like, well, some money's better than no money.
Right.
So
It's cheaper for them to approve a short sale than it is to acquire the property back through foreclosure. So they'll sometimes do that. It is a lot more involved because the bank that owns the loan on the property has to agree to all the terms of the contract. So it's a lot of work on our part because we usually do no less than about 10 HUD statements showing different scenarios of what they might agree to before they get to one. And then once they agree, if anything changes, you have to do it again, like the buyer's lender wasn't ready and the closing gets pushed back. So there's a lot of different scenarios there. But one thing in your question is that bank may agree to take less than what the payoff is, but what they might do is send a 1099 to that seller at the end of the year and they'll be taxed on the difference as income. So that's something that could happen. It just depends on what their negotiations were. And that's not always something that we know about. So,
That makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, the IRS has to. They're not gonna miss anything on that.
Right, right. So we do all those HUD statements, we send in all the scenarios to see what can be approved. We do encourage that the seller seek at least a CPA's advice on what could be their repercussions to their credit and to their income and their taxes in case they do get a 1099.
And then also like foreclosures, they may not have paid taxes, HOA, and we have to pay them. I've had a short sale. My very first transaction I closed was a short sale with 12 liens and judgments against them, all with my seller. So I had to, and it was not his homesteaded property. So when you have homesteaded property, you can get a partial release, releasing your homesteaded property. But for this, I actually had to get payoffs on each. And again, anytime your HUD changes, it goes back to the payoff lender or bank for approval. And it was probably a 7-month process to get the deal closed. So, yeah.
Yes, so if you have a buyer who needs a place to live, you may not want to pursue a short sale. And you know what happens sometimes is sellers are embarrassed. So there may be some things that they don't tell the listing agent. we're 2 months behind on our mortgage, might be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, we're separated and we might be getting a divorce, or, you know, what. So you may find these things out later, which is, you know, it's too bad that they don't share that with you, but they just might be embarrassed and feel like it's something private. So we have to learn how to be delicate. So sometimes the very first time you find out that they're behind on their mortgage may be from us. Because the title work came in and there's a lien, or before they file the substitute trustee's deed, they will file an affidavit of substitute trustee. So what that does is just show that we are now taking on this as a possible pre-foreclosure.
Okay, so if we think there might be a possibility that they're behind on their mortgage payments, is that a reason to open title?
Yes.
And the process of opening title would just be sending you the listing contract?
Right, or, you know, we typically know the agent, so call us, say, look, I've got this coming up, you know, and that might be a time that you put in your, what did you say, it's on the MLS?
Yes, it's on the Realtor Remarks in the MLS.
Right, to say title already opened at.
So we can call you and give you an address, and you can tell us if they're behind?
Well, we can go ahead, if you've got the listing on it.
Okay.
It's not somebody you're talking to, but
Right.
you've got the listing on it, we can go ahead and open title for you and see what comes up on the title commitment.
And if you're able to find these things out and you let us know, they haven't told us. So they very well may have a situation like this. So what do you do? I mean,
Well, I mean, I think that if you're gonna open title somewhere for your client, you tell them ahead of time. Look, you know, we know that there may be some issues that it would be helpful to have this cleared before you have a contract, so we're ready to go to closing. And if there's a holdup, it's not on the seller's side, you know? So, you know, just as a professional service, we want to be as ready as possible for that buyer.
Right.
So it's kind of in the way you present it. But we're investigating you because we think you're not telling us everything.
well, mine is it's a friend, and it's a divorce situation, and he hasn't moved his, he lives in Detroit, and he hasn't changed his Florida's mail, and even though she's not really supposed to be opening his mail. I mean, they have equity in the home, and so she's really worried that it's his responsibility to be making the mortgage payment. So I do have a little bit of inside information that they may be behind, you know, and so it's just like, so maybe I might want to go ahead and open title on that just to find out. So I just don't know. And like you said, you know, earlier where you want to be fair to both parties. I mean, she is more my friend, and I'm just happy that he's willing to use me as their realtor. And I'm trying to be very ethical and fair about, you know, information. So
it's hard because obviously she's your friend, so you have some personal feelings about what got them to the situation, but that has to be,
right.
You know, so. Yeah, it's tough.
But the other thing is, because they are friends, I want to do everything I can to help. And if they're in a bind, you know, if you can't help, you can't help them if you don't know how to make it. So.
Right. And opening title won't actually show if they're just like a month behind on their mortgage. But it will show if there's been anything filed. And it will give us a process to go ahead and say we could go ahead and order a payoff statement just to kind of see where things are. And that could be presented as giving them a more realistic bottom line number.
Yes,
That would be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, you just, not to say we're doing this to see if you're behind on your mortgage, but
Is that
if I
when
go
you-
ahead and open title.
Is that when you need the seller's authorization to request a payoff from the mortgage company, or can you guys do that on your own?
Occasionally, some of them require that authorization
Right.
form, but most of them, if we have the loan number and their social security number,
It's all done through the automated
we
system.
can make a phone call
We don't
and
even
order
talk
it.
to someone.
Okay,
So,
excellent.
Well, and being a new agent too, if there's information in this that I'm missing or whatever, because I'm obviously new and don't know what I'm doing yet, that would give a little bit more time as far as you could say, oh, we need this and we've got to get this from you. So that way, if I actually do have an interested buyer that comes in that wants the property, I'm not dragging, I'm not holding it back by my inexperience.
Exactly, right. So, And just as a little personal note, you want to help them as much as possible without working for free.
Yeah.
So at some point, you don't want to give away all your commissions.
I know, and that's a funny situation too, because I feel like I would. I mean, it's one of those trades where I'm gaining experience and knowledge, but
Yeah.
it's a tough one. But how do you get started if it weren't for friends and family?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. You might not be collecting the full 3% on your mom.
I would charge my mom 6 on her the whole thing. She'd be doing 12. Not really.
So after we gather all this information, we've been working with the mortgage company the whole time, and we finally got to set the closing date and time. The mortgage company sends us closing instructions, and from that, we'll send you a copy of the settlement statement, which is this. Did we give everybody a copy?
Good job, you.
Which is that crazy intimidating form. Or someone that doesn't understand it.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got one.
I had one.
Yep.
A number of these
I've
pages
bought
are-
and sold myself, like on a personal level. This is still about as clear as that to me.
Well, all of this that we've been talking about has all been going on at the same time that the mortgage company's working with the buyer to gather all of their information, and hopefully at least a couple of days before the scheduled closing, they'll send us instructions so that we can prepare this document, which is what puts everything all together and comes down to a bottom line, hopefully proceeds to the seller, and a bottom line of what the buyer needs to bring to closing. So as soon as we have everything we need to prepare this, we'll send you a copy of it. Even if the lender is still previewing it, a lot of times we'll send it and say, here's the settlement statement that's gone to the lender, we're waiting on their final approval. And if we're still waiting, they may still make some tweaks in it, the numbers may change a little. So,
All right, just a quick, there's also here working towards closing, and it's a checklist of some items that it's always good to have prior to closing. Contract amendments, any amendments for seller contributions, price changes, we need those. Not only do we need those, but if there's a lender involved, the lender has to approve, especially any seller contributions. Some things to remember when you give us a survey, I know we talked about making sure it's readable. Sometimes, do you need this one?
I don't know, maybe I do.
Sometimes, especially if you scan an existing survey, it's a little bit darker, so when it comes over, it's not readable, or we sit there and get magnifying glasses out and have to try to make out the legal, which we've done before. Sometimes I'll get survey, if it's a big survey and you can't get it all in one attachment, you can send it to us in pieces. We're really good at putting together puzzles. Other items are HOAs. We're finding more commonly now that HOA companies, in order to provide their assessment fees and dues and transfer fees, they're requiring payment up front. Title companies cannot pay upfront fees because we don't collect them until at closing, but we do need this information prior to closing. So sometimes, I know you guys have an HOA addendum that talks about the resale, like AMI, well, was first.
They changed their name.
Yeah,
It's
they-
now called First Service. They're a management company for some of the homeowners associations.
They'll provide that with their resale certificate. So you actually have to buy a resale certificate regardless of whether or not it was agreed upon in the contract or not. Because that's the only way that they'll provide their information.
Is that a company that, okay, so in the Woodlands, we don't have HOAs.
You have the township.
Right, so where, you said First Service.
If you have townhomes, they're
Yes.
gonna be managed by HOA.
Yes,
So that could be the management company. If you
Okay.
deal with properties in Conroe or outside of the Woodlands area.
yes.
Spring Trails.
Yeah, Spring Trails.
Spring Trails, for sure, this First Service manages their homeowners association.
Okay, so you need from the HOA prior to closing, what specific?
Proof that the HOA dues are paid current.
Okay,
Also what the amount is, any fees that we need to collect for community enhancement fees or
Okay.
transfer fees.
Okay.
And they require a payment from a party prior to closing to provide that information.
So the resale certificate basically says this property the title can be transferred
Mhm.
to this property.
Because all the fees are current.
Yeah, all the
Right.
fees are current.
And
or-
there's a charge for that.
Mhm.
They charge for that service.
Yes.
And do all HOAs provide a resale certificate?
Or statement of account.
So everybody has to do that?
Yeah.
And it could be that they're separate, depending on the management company. So different neighborhoods, they'll have a homeowners association typically named after their subdivision.
Right.
Like the Spring Trails Property Owners Association. But that property owners association has a management company that handles all their paperwork and fees and, you know, sending out restriction violation letters and that sort of thing. And that's where First Service comes in. They're a management company that manages several different
Right.
homeowners associations. And we just know about them. There's a few others also where to give us any information that we need for closing, the statement of account that shows all of their fees and such, they require that it be paid for upfront.
So,
Is that transfer, is that the transfer fee or is that
That's
something
even
different?
separate.
Oh.
So on your HOA addendum to your contract, down at the bottom, there's a place to mark whether the buyer or the seller pays for that information that the title company needs.
and what's typical?
What do you say?
Typically, I see that the sellers
Yes, I would think so.
will provide that information.
Okay.
What we do is we have our logins to be able to go in and start the process of ordering it, and we'll get to the point where we've entered everything that you'll need to order it. And then we'll send out an email or call the seller once, or the listing agent, and say, this is the confirmation, we need you to go in and complete payment. They will not start processing the statement of account or resale certificate until payment's been received. Some companies, they charge, if you need it within 10 days, 7 to 10 days is
$150 extra.
yeah.
Whoa.
So they can get very
Yeah.
pricey.
And if you're 3 days before closing and your seller still hasn't paid it, then it's like $250.
Right. They'll charge rush fees, and rush doesn't mean in the next hour, it means in the next couple of days.
Yeah. And so it's our practice that we pull our tax certificates whenever we send out the title commitments. And it's our practice to send a separate email, sometimes a phone call, letting you know that's not sent with the title commitment package. It's sent separately so it doesn't get lost in the mix, saying, we just wanted to let you know this property's managed. At this point, we've already entered the information for whoever to go in and pay for it, so.
Do most HOAs have a transfer fee?
Yes. Even the Woodlands has a transfer fee of
$100.
What's a typical transfer fee?
Typically,
Usually around 150.
Yeah, 150.
Some of them will be a little more, some a little less, but
Oh, okay.
that's average.
Okay, so because I know when you take a listing, that's part of the MLS input. Is there an HOA? Is there a transfer fee? What's the annual or monthly fees to be in the HOA? If the seller doesn't know
Mhm.
if or what the transfer fee is, do you guys maintain that database, or do we need to contact the HOA?
You can call us because we can look it up.
Mm-hmm.
More than likely, we've handled a transaction in that neighborhood and we can look
Yes.
up a prior file.
Great.
Because
Or,
they don't return your calls, I count.
yeah,
Oh,
I mean, in my
HOAs
experience.
are horrible,
Yeah.
in my experience.
Because I was
horrible.
trying to enter my information and it's like, I don't know this, so I call and
Yeah.
they don't call you back.
Yeah, they don't care.
so, if you ever have any questions, if we don't know the answer when you call, we will find the answer file for you. So, other items, negotiating your repair credits. I recently had a transaction where the seller paid for the repairs, but on the closing statement wanted to be reimbursed by the buyer for half of it. There is probably not a lender around that will accept a buyer credit to the seller. So I had to tell them I don't know how that's going to be handled because I'm not supposed to know of any money that's handled outside of the transaction off the closing statement, but we can't put it on the closing statement.
y'all need to have a conversation.
And it's also important that we get invoices for repairs too, prior to the file being ready to close. That way it's more seamless whenever we get our closing.
And there's another good reason for that. If there's a repair that the seller's gonna pay for through closing, they're gonna have us put it on the settlement statement and pay the air conditioning repair company on the closing statement. We need to have that on there as soon as possible, because a lot of times the lender will see that and they'll wanna know, what repair was that? They may wanna send a inspector out to make sure it was really done. So we don't wanna surprise them by throwing that on there at the closing table. We got this repair amendment or an invoice that came in that we now need to add to the HUD.
With lenders being so picky and crazy about that stuff, what's the best way to advise people to handle repairs? I mean, do you advise them just to do it before and give invoices? The proof that it's
If they
done?
can do that, some sellers don't have the money to do that.
I wondered if that was
So-
ideal or not.
And it depends on what it is. I mean, if the air conditioning unit had to be replaced, that, you know, it's probably not a good idea to pay for that through closing unless it's all been disclosed to the lender and they already know about it and they've sent their inspector out. You just don't want that to be a surprise that they learn about at closing. And the other thing is, on the amendments, when it's agreed upon in the negotiation, say the inspection was done and the buyer asks for some money to pay for, you know, things that need to be repaired around the property, it's really a good idea not to put seller agrees to pay this amount of money in lieu of repairs.
Yeah.
Leave those words off.
Yes.
Just say that the sellers agree to pay this much toward the buyer's closing costs.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And if you're doing that, it's also a good idea to have a conversation or have the buyer's agent have a conversation with the lender to see if there's gonna be some kind of limit on how much they're gonna allow. Because sometimes they all work in good faith, thinking the seller's gonna pay this much toward the closing cost, everybody's happy, and then the lender can't allow it for whatever reason, especially on an FHA loan.
Is there a typical, like on a conventional loan, is there a limit on the seller contribution to buyer closing costs?
Like, it usually can't be more than the actual closing cost.
Okay, but it could be up to?
I think so.
Yeah.
That'd be a good, double check it with the lender.
Okay.
But, the usual thing I've seen is it's an FHA loan and the buyer has to have a minimum investment of 3.5%, I think it is. So if you get down to the bottom line and that seller contribution made the buyer go in at under that investment, they won't allow the full amount of the contribution.
Gotcha.
Which makes the buyer upset because they're getting that in lieu of a repair that should have
Right.
been done by the seller. So,
Gotcha.
anyway, just little.
The next one, seller proceeds, who we can pay and what the rules are. Typically, whoever is your seller on the contract is who, and who is invested in title is who we can pay. We can't pay off the money that their parents use, let them borrow. We've got to pay directly who the seller is. Another thing is if they are closing on their purchase at another title company and you want us to wire the proceeds directly to the other title company, we need to know that prior to closing, because everything on your closing statement has to be approved by the lender. If it's for the seller or the buyer, it's still got to be approved by the lender. So if we're at closing and they're like, oh, well, can you just send the proceeds to XYZ title company? We have to amend the HUD, send it back for reapproval.
And they would ask that if they're purchasing and closing on a purchase
Right.
somewhere else?
Mhm.
Okay.
Right, and
Okay.
we can do it, but we
Yeah.
just need to know as soon as possible we're gonna be asked to do it, so that we don't have to send that HUD back to the lender. And sometimes that's quick, there's somebody there that can say, sure, no problem,
Mhm.
but sometimes they're at lunch.
Yeah.
And you're,
Mhm.
so.
And then also, it's good to know your commissions, again, as soon as possible, whether you're collecting the full 3%. We know that the buyer's commission is stated in the contract as far as the percentage and any bonuses that there may be. But it's also good if you're giving a commission credit to the buyer or seller, that we know about that in advance too, especially if you're giving a credit back to the buyer, because again, it's gotta be approved by the lender, if there's a lender involved.
And that would be another conversation to have with the lender up front before you just assume that they're gonna let you do it that way. So we've seen that, the buyer's agent has agreed to give $1,000 of their commissions to the buyer. And they want it shown on the settlement statement as a credit from them to their buyer. That has to be approved by the lender. Okay.
And then I think invoices kind of we rolled up with the repair credit, so. All right, so once we have all of that, all of your amendments, the HOA information, commissions, invoices, lenders, closing instructions, we prepare the closing statement. And go over the top portion. It tells you type of loan, whether or not it's FHA, conventional uninsured, VA, or conventional insured. So you'll see the file number, which will be your GF number with the title company you're working at, as well as the loan number.
Could we maybe take a 5-minute break?
Absolutely.
You all probably need
We've
it.
talked for a while, haven't we?
You'll probably learn better after maybe just a 5-minute break. Are you
Sure.
guys good with that?
That one's perfect.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.